An old woman pointed at the meadow where a boy had once told her a story by a campfire. She was wearing a skirt and a headscarf, and had been working all alone in the middle of the field, gleaning corn from the stubble, a wheelbarrow by her side. There were big logs in the fire, and we were looking at stars, she said. My friends were all from this village behind us. We had all grown up together, and at the time, his story seemed impossible to believe. It was only much later in life that I realized how real it was. Charlie was my friend's name. His parents had both set out on a trip and had left him with his grandmother. While she was out working, Charlie would stand on top of things, looking into the wind and just staying still. We all thought it was very odd. He would get up very early in the morning, just before dawn, and stand leaning on the wall by the vines until the moment when the sun would first come out, and he'd stand there with his eyes closed, breathing deeply for a while. Then after a few minutes, he'd always snap out of whatever it was he was doing and would start doing his chores on the farm, cutting down branches and feeding them to the goats, letting the chickens out of the coop, and filling up water in the wading pool for the ducks. At night, after everyone had eaten dinner, he'd go back outside and sit in the treehouse or walk along the fence by the horses, often staying out very late and sometimes lighting candles way out in the distance that he'd sit in front of, staring off. The day he told us all this story, we had been out together all day and having a great time. We decided to make a big bonfire and sit under the stars for a while, and Charlie seemed happy to join us. When it came around to his turn to tell a story, he told us there had been a very difficult time in his life, when he had terrible allergies and he was always miserable. He said he had learned to talk to the universe and had read stories of Taoist immortals who would come to people in their dreams and teach them the secrets of immortality. The stories would often involve flying away to heaven in broad daylight, like in the story we heard in church about Jesus. So Charlie said he came up with a ritual. He said it was clever and lofty, and that he made it so that he would do his ritual for 60 days, and on the 60th day, the day of the new moon, he'd do his thing and rise up into the sky and be done with all his allergies. But when he went to have that approved by his friend, the universe just said to him, "Very nice, but I'd like to see a 100-year version." So he spent his 60 days expanding out his clever and lofty plan geometrically, out into every direction, like a snowflake, and when he was done, he took it to the Chinese New Year's parade on the day of the new moon to have it approved. After all the dragons had gone by, zigzagging and touching the people on each side of the street, what turned out to be the last dragon went by, but it wasn't a dragon. Its color was gold, and it made a point of coming over to touch him. And just then he heard someone in the crowd behind him say, "That's a carp. They live for 100 years. And that's when he knew his 100-year plan had been approved. Charlie said that's when he became Charlie 5, a Taoist immortal, and he went about living his 100 more years. He said that whenever he happened to be reading a purple book, he'd be approached in his dreams by Taoists that would politely recruit him for various projects. And one night, about 5 years after he'd first been told about the 100-year plan, and he'd just about gotten used to the idea, they came to him to gently propose something much more difficult. He told us it was the 3,000-year plan. He'd have to leave the village, not into the sky in broad daylight, but up into the steep mountains, where he'd be transformed into a giant chunk of gold and installed on top of some mountain as its new peak, so that it would have him standing out above the clouds that covered all the other mountains, snow-covered and looking like a mountain peak, but feeling just like he'd always felt. He said the reason that was hard was that all the people he'd grown up with would be down in the world, living their lives and eventually having their own children, and then those children would grow up and live their lives, and so on and so on, while he was just up there looking at the waves of the clouds and the atmosphere over the world. He said he'd occasionally hold his breath and go down into the world, where it would be decades later, so he'd say he was his own grandnephew. And he'd go visit various people who had been related to people he'd known, but that he couldn't hold his breath like that for very long. So after a few days, he'd always have to go back up into the steep and cold mountains and go back to being a big golden mountain peak above the clouds, breathing that higher level air that he had come to be used to. Other times he would reach down as if the mountain peak were his head, and his arms and hands could stretch deep into the world to raise up a friend or a relative so he could talk face to face above the mist, before returning the person to their own world below with a special story or message. And of course he was able to visit people in their dreams and show them different possibilities, like an angel in the story of Scrooge or It's a Wonderful Life. Charlie said when he first started to agree to the 3,000-year plan and started gathering the sticks and flowers and roots he'd have to prepare and cook in order to carry out that new plan, he started noticing past and future weren't as different as he thought they were. One day he was sitting and chanting with some Buddhist friends, and he started to see in his mind's eye different stories from his childhood where he had been in questionable or risky situations. Stories where someone might say, "Somebody must have been watching out for you." And he suddenly realized that it was himself all along, right there chanting with his friends in the temple, that was watching out for himself in his own past. And once he realized he could do this for himself, he started doing it for other people he knew, keeping an eye out for them and being their good luck just at the times in their past when they needed it the most. Shortly after Charlie had first agreed to participate in the 3,000-year plan, he was walking in the woods by a fresh stream to gather the herbs and mushrooms he needed for his universe tea, and he saw a turtle. He happened to mention the turtle to a friend who was a shaman in the human world, and she told him to ask the turtle an important question for her next time he happened to see the turtle. And this particular turtle was almost always in the same spot, glistening in the sun on a rock, and at the same time of the afternoon every day. So the next day, Charlie brought his friend's question to the turtle. He usually just said hello to all the animals, introducing himself as Charlie 5, since all the animals knew who 5 was. But this time he did as he said he would, and he asked his friend's question, and he stayed by the rock in the stream for a long time while the turtle got very animated and gave him an answer, a little turtle poem that he wrote down. Light the silent candle, sparkle like the wind, raise the blessing storm, dream the ancient goodness, harmony the tune, collect the sparks of mission, glisten with aware, park the moving scene, settle in the sound, future the curve, smile the gleam, twinkle the darkness, pattern the profound, be the humble prayer, happy the forever. Over that summer, the turtle taught Charlie a class he called Turtle Clarity, and there was a test at the end. The test was to take a wise vacation. The first day, Charlie thought maybe the turtle just meant to take it easy for a day since he had just helped a friend move a bunch of furniture and boxes all night and was very tired. But the turtle would look exasperated each day when Charlie came by, pulling his head into his shell and refusing to talk. Eventually, Charlie got the idea wise vacation is stillness of mind, trying to stay quiet inside. So after a week, he came to the turtle on the rock and stayed as quiet as possible inside. It was like they were two turtles just shining in the same sun. And that's when the turtle started talking again. Charlie had then completed the test successfully, and now there was an advanced class, Turtle Destiny. Just a quick class before the end of the summer, when the turtle would have to go under the mud and shut off his breathing and heartbeat for the long winter. The destiny that the turtle was talking about was a bright light. The bright light he looks straight into all winter. And at the end of the short Turtle Destiny class, there was another test. Green the Bridge. It was an advanced class and a difficult test. Charlie wasn't sure how to pass this one. He went to sleep one night thinking about it, and he met those Taoists in the dream again. And this time, they had a much more difficult proposal than ever before. They were recruiting, they said, for help setting up and tearing down the camp, as if it was just camp counselors at summer camp who come a couple days early to set up tents and stay a few days after to put them back in storage. But the camp they were talking about was heaven and earth. This was the tough kind of immortality, way more demanding than his 3,000-year plan, and another level of difficulty. Now it wasn't just your close friends and family who were living their lives while you watched from above. Now it was your entire world, the history of your species, and all the species that came before and after. And Charlie would have to watch the entire show from start to finish, be there to counsel anyone who needed it, and, like they said, help set it up and tear it down. Sometimes Taoists monitored the world only from afar, and managed it like a system of rivers, avoiding stoppages and floods by making sure there were always other avenues for the rivers of life to flow through. Other times, they took a personal interest in the lives of particular creatures, coming to them in dreams and as characters in their lives to offer ideas and perspectives. There was some disagreement among the other immortals about whether to interfere with the flow of things. Of course, they wanted to help when they saw people in trouble, or wanted to stop things that seemed bad from happening. So, new recruits were taken to the scene where the asteroid came down and wiped out the Dinosaur World. First, they'd get to know the dinosaurs and their world and see all the beauty in it. Charlie watched from the side as dinosaurs played in the mountains. He saw that the big fan on the back of the Stegosaurus was radiating outward from the energy in the dinosaur earth that the Stegosaurus was allowing to flow through him. Just like the trees that radiate outward from the earth into the branches, and downward from the moon and the stars into the roots in the earth. The dinosaur world was a lot like the one where Charlie grew up, with many different types of personalities. Most dinosaurs were happy to live their lives the dinosaur way, but there were also the occasional dinosaurs who saw things differently. And Charlie watched an episode play out where one dinosaur, in the shape of a Tyrannosaurus, was more of a philosopher, and he'd sit on the side of the hill while the other dinosaurs played, thinking about the meaning of things. And when he'd go back to the group and try to do things differently, or worse, try to boss around the other dinosaurs into doing things his way, which he thought was better, they'd all get mad at him and send him to dinosaur jail. He was like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer of the dinosaurs. Not allowed to play because he was annoying to everybody. He'd watch the rest of them living their dinosaur lives from up on his hill in dinosaur jail, and he decided maybe the whole dinosaur world was wrong, a bunch of monsters that ought to be stopped. So he went down the hill again, and he suggested this to the others, and of course they just got mad and sent him back to dinosaur jail again. Eventually, though, he got his two younger dinosaur friends to agree with him and see things his way. And that's when the trouble started. They decided to end the dinosaur world together for everybody's own good. So the three of them started dancing in a circle counterclockwise for 3 days, with their heads pointing down and their tails up in the air, swirling in the opposite direction, clockwise. And all three were wearing conical hats and singing a very strange dinosaur song. After 3 days, they stopped, turned around, and danced the circle in the other direction, clockwise, spinning the tails counterclockwise, still wearing their conical hats and singing that strange dinosaur song. And after that second 3 days, boom, the asteroid hit. And the whole dinosaur world was vaporized and everybody crystallized into emeralds and rubies. And Charlie watched across the centuries as they sailed forward into the future effortlessly. Sometimes sitting on the necks of kings and queens, sometimes buried deep in the earth, always just sailing in the peace like the stars. It was a hard thing for Charlie to watch, after getting to know so many different dinosaur families and trying to help them understand and live their lives. And that was the beginner class. The title of advanced class was, Which Came First, the Chicken or the Egg? The advanced class took place, it turned out, at a group meditation where Charlie showed up one evening. Charlie sat down in a large room with several other people in a circle, lights low, candles lit, and a bell was rung 3 times. Charlie closed his eyes. There was a very elaborate and brightly colored circus with a flying white elephant soaring around the show with his eyes closed, jumping through hoops and hovering through scenery, smiling. Among the other circus objects, there was a big sphere like an egg, made up of several outer layers, and it was taken over and occupied by a sound, by the elephant's presence, but invisibly, so that even though he couldn't see the elephant, Charlie knew that it was the elephant's presence moving through the universe circus egg. A huge white elephant the size of a mountain appeared, marching, and the room Charlie and some friends were in was a purple rectangle box riding on the top of the elephant's head like a hat. The elephant was in space, looking at the earth and its tree of life in the distance, and heading toward it across the great empty desert. When the elephant got closer, there were several others gathered around too, all gathered around and looking closely at the earth, like a bunch of doctors over a patient trying to investigate a problem and heal. When the elephant arrived to join the group of doctors, he offered them the purple hat he was wearing, which was the meditation chapel Charlie was sitting in with a few other friends. It was his gift for the group, and when he took off the hat and handed it toward them, it turned into a butterfly that flew away over an ascending stairway. As the butterfly faded away in the distance, Charlie found himself standing on a ledge halfway up a mountain above a lake. Charlie and several others were just ghosts standing on the ledge, and the jungle they were looking out at in the distance was much more real than they were. They knew they had to focus together at a bullseye pattern in the distance within the jungle pattern. As they continued to focus on that target, it solidified into a fruit. It was their prayer, the prayer of ghosts, that created the spherical fruit in the jungle. The fruit gradually matured over the course of the vision, and Charlie began to realize he and the other people around him were the flower, and the fruit was at the center, and the flower was falling away, happy about the fruit it had given birth to. Then the music turned a little dark. The bugs of the jungle had come to harvest the fruit, to bring it down into the depths of the soil. Charlie watched as they spread throughout the world, taking pieces of the fruit everywhere. And this planting of the fruit was like putting people into apartments and houses, square caverns where pieces of the single fruit had been planted. And of course, the fruit had contained seeds. But surprisingly, as Charlie watched, the seeds showed up as the flames of candles that were being lit on the private altars in all the square apartments and rooms. Then Charlie noticed that each flame had an eye inside of it, and only the outer edge was flame. Everything within was seeing the world and reflecting it. One of the first scenes it saw was a nativity, And though the nativity was within a triangle, which is typical, this triangle was at the top of a pyramid full of similar nativity scenes in all the rooms or stables below it as well. They all had the flame, the seed, the light coming into the world. And the flame went on to see much more, reflecting all the worlds. The light was the heart, and the job of the light was to see. Within kaleidoscopic scenes, the flame was seeing, and it focused in on one simple vision of an egg sitting alone in the darkness. The egg then, of course, hatched, and out of the egg came the universe, exploding out in every direction, everything flying apart. Then, after all the expanding, the vision came to a close. The expanding vision had stopped and was relatively calm in the darkness. Charlie put his head down and closed his eyes tightly, and everything was dark, and something was holding everything together, bringing together something tightly out of the previous expansion. Everything that had burst out of the egg had become the universe and was gathered and compressed into a darkness of total connection. The darkness then suddenly opened up, and Charlie sat up straight again, let go of the tightening that was pulling everything together, and he sat calmly with his hands outstretched as the darkness opened out into a crystal heaven all around a dark core. He was looking out at the boundless crystal sea that he was sitting at the center of. Charlie got up and walked forward, and the white elephant joined him, and they walked out through a door at the top of the universe. At first, it was a little sad, leaving the universe behind. And they both walked together quietly and solemnly. But then the elephant made Charlie realize they were both just the radiance moving forward on a different, higher plane of the story. As they continued walking out into that light, something shocking happened. As they walked forward, a waterfall suddenly burst forward onto them, and it flowed down past them, going backward through all the previous visions, backward in time, through all the journeys of the seeds within seeds, nourishing everything. And so Charlie realized that's what he and the elephant were doing. Going out through that door, they were kicking off the waterfall that flows retroactively into the past, a waterfall that blesses everything. And the elephant explained silently that the waterfall is what everything is made of, animating the thing that launched it. The elephant sat with a glowing globe on his head. It was the world, glowing in a healing peace. He reached up with his trunk above his head and above the globe on top of it, with a single blossoming gold flower on the tip of his trunk, and he placed the blossom in the air above the globe, and the globe became liquid inside. And Charlie saw this and wondered if the elephant had just created water. Then the globe of liquid transformed and became a globe that was the universe, with all the stars and galaxies, and all the black sea of space, and the universe had a spine. It was a globe with a clearly formed spine going up the very center from its south pole to its north pole. The spine had chakras, and each of them was lit with energy that flowed throughout the web of the universe. And Earth was one of the chakras, not the top or bottom chakra, but somewhere in the middle. And so Charlie realized that Earth really was the center of the universe, even though the universe was much bigger than previously imagined. And so everything we think and say and do is important, so important, lighting up the chakra at the center of the spine of the universe as the light radiates outward on its mission. And as the story neared the end, the elephant got up and went inside a square door. at the center of the universe that he had created. And with just his head showing, looking out from the square door, he reached to the side with his trunk and slowly closed the barn door with his great black globe that was our universe. And Charlie was sad. He said, "What will we do now that you're gone? How should we behave? How should we be now that you've left our lives and our story and gone inside that barn door?" And the last scene was the answer. There was this black globe, like the center of a sunflower without the petals, and after looking all around at it, Charlie swept down into a scene in it, where there were a few people, and they were taking deep, slow breaths with all the wind of the universe. And as they walked slowly, there was an orb of light surrounding each of their heads. It was their prayer for the universe, the fruit on the tree of life. And they moved around slowly, serving each other, and they looked up, and the clouds moved slowly. So the answer to how should we be was breathe the wind and pray the light and move effortlessly and free like the clouds, helping each other. When Charlie saw the turtle again the next day, he showed the turtle his mind with the story of the elephant and the universe to see what the turtle would say about it. Meanwhile, Charlie was still trying to figure out how he was going to pass this turtle destiny test, and the turtle, of course, saw that too. The turtle smiled. He stuck his left foot straight out in the air behind him, and he said, "They showed me that too when I first started. Welcome to 5. The green bridge," the turtle said, "is a test that's never complete. It's something you do every minute. It's us as we twist in the wind, as green and fresh as pure life. Ascending into heaven's palace, wandering in the flowing stream, we answer the autumn of the world with cables that search like a bridge, a golden cord of shelter in the mystery, whispering like the boundless snow."